Hey, what's new and exciting? It's Kevin O'Shaughnessy here, and today we are going to talk about the major scale, hopefully in a way that's a little different than you've seen it before, but in a way that is going to help you get to know it better. We're going to use it to learn the names of the notes along the neck. I know that can be hard for a lot of guitar players. And we'll also use it as an introduction for learning how to improvise and get out of the box when you're stuck in one scale pattern and you want to be able to move in and out of it. So let's jump into it. Here we go. So the major scale is probably one of the biggest building blocks in our system of music. And before we can get to playing it, I'm going to give you a very simple formula. We need a couple of building blocks here. So first thing you need to understand is the concept of whole steps and half steps. Now this is not rocket science by any stretch of the imagination. A half step is simply the distance of one fret to the next. So if I go to the first fret and I play that, and I play the second fret, right? Those two notes are a half step apart, or you might have heard the term semitone. And a whole step, as you might imagine, is 2 frets apart. First fret to third fret, okay? So half steps, whole steps, or semitones and semitones and whole tones, okay? I like half steps and whole steps. It's a little easier for me to grab onto, but whatever vocabulary works for you. So our major scale is made up of a very simple formula. From any note that you start on, you can start on any fret here on the guitar. You take that note and you move up a whole step, then another whole step, then a half step. So 2 whole steps and a half step, and then you go 3 whole steps. So whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So it's going to look like this. We've got, here's our starting note. I'm on the first fret of the second string. So from here, I move up a whole step, another whole step, here's my half step, another whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Okay? And that's the major scale, right? We probably know this. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Right? You might have learned that in, elementary school music class or something like that. So, we've got a formula. Doesn't make any difference what fret you're on, right? I can start here. Same scale, okay? Absolutely, it's got the same tonality, it's just a little lower in this case. So, what we've got is a formula for the major scale that we can use all over the neck. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take that formula and we're going to start adding note names to it, okay? And we use letters to label all our notes, okay? Our musical alphabet is actually pretty simple. We've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then the whole cycle starts all over again. What we're going to do is we're going to start again here, first fret, second string. This note right here is C. And that's how I'm going to start referring to it for the rest of the video. This is C. We're going to start using letter names instead of fret numbers, okay? We know the formula, 2 whole steps and a half step, followed by 3 whole steps and a half step. And we're going to use that, and I'm going to show you how to apply these letter names to each one of the scales that we learned today so that you can start to get to know the names of the notes on the guitar, okay? Because let's face it, if we're talking about frets, it only applies to guitar players and bass guitar players, okay? Nobody else. You try to say, oh yeah, I'm playing at the 3rd fret. You try to tell that to a keyboard player, they're not going to know what you're talking about. So we've got to be able to understand the notes that we're playing, right? That's what's going on. So let's start here. We've got C. We go up 1 whole step to D. The next whole step is E. Then we've got F, which is a half step away. G is a whole step. And now we've reached the end of our musical alphabet. We've got A as the next whole step to B, then C. Okay? We're back to the beginning. So we've got C, D, E, F, excuse me, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay? Now, this video here is going to be part of a series. So here's a finger pattern that I want you to work on. You don't need to build this up to any kind of speed, but use these fingers. You're going to use your first finger, second finger, fourth finger. Okay? Now you're going to kind of walk over here. You're going to do the same thing. First, second, fourth, and then first and second. Later on in the series, this will make a lot of sense, okay? So we've got 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2. And we can go backwards. We're going to go 2, 1, 4, 2, 1, 4, 2, 1. Now it's probably a little bit of a stretch to do that, but you'll notice that as I'm playing, I lift my fingers up as I switch notes. So I switch the note. I don't hold a finger down. So that's what relieves the stretch as you go along. Switch, switch. And notice my first finger is already moving towards the next position. That's how I'm going to get the fluid, that's how I'm going to get the fluency, the fluidity, that's the word I'm looking for. That's how I'm going to get the fluidity to go from one position to the next. Okay? Now, like I said, you don't need to work this up to any speed. If you were a violin player or a cello player or something like that, they usually have to work that up fairly quickly. But as guitar players, we don't usually have to. So you do want to be able to keep it in time, and you want to name the notes as you go. So we want to be 1, 2, 3, 4, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. All right? Very simple. So now, I mean, that's taken us up to the 13th fret. And now we know 8 notes along the B string. That's pretty good. Now we're going to take this around. We're going to go to the E string now, 3rd fret. This is G. Now the pattern I'm going to be following here is what we call the circle of fifths. And that's too much to get into for the scope of this video. I will talk about that in another video. But what's really cool about this is that we're going to carry over all of the letter names from the C major scale except for the second to last note, which in the case of G is going to be an F. We're going to raise that to F sharp. Okay, now if you've heard the term sharps and flats, you don't really know what's going on. A sharp is a note, we use a sharp, to raise a note a half step. And I'll show you why this is important. So right here, E string, 3rd fret, this is G. If I just carry up the notes and I follow the formula, right? Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. The notes that I get are going to be G, A, B, C, D, E. Now E and F, I don't know if you noticed this, but E and F on the C major scale were a half step apart. They're still a half step apart in the G scale. So is B and C. So in essence, all of your letter names in our musical system are a whole step apart, except B and C and E and F. So if I were to play that scale without altering the F, it's going to sound like this. Okay, what we have there is the Mixolydian mode. Again, something else that we'll get into later on. But that's G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And what we need to do, it doesn't even fit the formula. We've got the half step in the wrong place. It's got to be between the last 2 notes. So we're going to take this F and we're going to raise it to F sharp. This allows us to keep all of the notes of the scale in alphabetical order while still getting the formula correct. So we've got G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Okay? Now, if you are familiar with flats, which do the opposite of sharps, they lower a note a half a step. You might ask, well, why don't we call this note G flat instead of G sharp? Or G flat instead of F sharp. And that's because, like I said, we want to keep all of the notes in alphabetical order. Does it sound easier to remember to say E, F sharp, G, or E, G flat, G? Right? See, to me, the first is a little easier. E, F sharp, G. That means you're using all of the same letter names for all of the notes in the scale. So if we go through that again, that's going to be G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. With me so far? Cool. Let's move on. We're going to go back to the B string at the 3rd fret. Okay, now part of the reason why this pattern is called the circle of fifths, actually I should say the reason this pattern is called the circle of fifths, is that each note we're moving to is 5 letter names away from the previous note. So we started on C. If we go up 5 notes, C, D, E, F, we end up on G. Same thing with this next one here, right? I said we were starting on D, from G, G, A, B, C, D, as we go around our musical cycle, right? So here we are, third fret, B string, this is D. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all of the letter names that we pulled from the G major scale. This includes the F sharp. So we've got D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. And now we have to raise that second to last note. Notice I'm coming up to that B, C thing again, which are only a half step away. I've got to take that C and raise it to C sharp. So again, the whole scale sounds like this. This is D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Okay, same formula, same frets, different scale, and most of the notes carry over from G major. Now, because the B string is tuned differently than all of the rest of the strings, we got to make a little bit of a compensation here. We're going to go down to the G string at the second fret, and this is A. So we're going to carry over all of the notes from the D major scale, including the F sharp and the C sharp, and we're going to change the second to last note of the A major scale from what would be G to G sharp. Watch this. We've got A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. Okay. Now, again, this is just something that we need to memorize. Okay. Very simple stuff in the grand scheme of things. We just need to take the time to memorize it. And I find by breaking it down into these scales, that's easy to do. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. And if we're also looking down at the frets while we're playing for the time being, we can see where those notes are. We can see that A is here at the second fret on the G string. It's also up here on the 14th fret of the G string, okay? That relationship is kind of important. Okay, pretty cool too. From here on out, for the rest of these scales that I'm going to demonstrate today, we're going to stay at the second fret. So if we go down to the D string second fret, that's E. Once again, carry over all of the notes from the A scale, and we're going to alter the second to last note. Looks like this. E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. Okay? Pull that down, second fret of the A string. This is B. We've got B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp. Now this is a weird one. A sharp, B. Now again, technically, we don't like seeing certain accidentals like A sharp. A lot of times if you play jazz and things like that, you'd want to see that as a B flat. But again, that pulls the notes out of alphabetical order and makes the scale harder to memorize. So even though it's a weird one, A sharp, we don't see that a whole lot, especially as guitar players, it's easier to remember in the long run. So that's why it's presented the way it is. So we go to the second fret on the E string, I'm on the low E string, second fret, this is F sharp. I'm going to take all those notes in addition to that wacky A sharp, we're going to have another weird note, but this is F sharp. So we got F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp. Now here's the really weird one, E sharp, F sharp. Now when we looked at the other scales, the E to F, that's a half step apart, right? So if you were looking at that on the piano, that'd be two white keys together with no black key in between them. So E to F. So why are we calling that F sharp? It's not actually a sharp. Well, again, it keeps everything in alphabetical order. That's what we call an enharmonic equivalent. Those are two notes that sound the same but are spelled differently. So if you were just listening to a piece of music, you can't really tell the difference between an E sharp and an F. It's the same pitch, all right? We label it a little differently because context is super important in music. So again, those notes are going to be F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp. Now, since the low E string and the high E string are identical, we're going to pull that all the way up, second fret, high E string, and do the exact same scale. The notes are going to be identical. You get two for the price of one. F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp. Okay, simple enough. And the last one we're going to cover today, we're going to go back down to the B string. We're at the second fret. So now we're one fret. We're a half step away from where we started, and we're halfway through the circle of fifths. This is C sharp. We're going to take all of the notes from F sharp that we collected, including that E sharp, and we're going to add one more sharp. Now at this point, every single note of the scale is going to be sharp. So it's actually kind of easy to remember. C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, C sharp. And just like the E sharp, B sharp is the same thing. If you look at B and C on the piano, it's two white keys right next to each other with no black key in between them. And so we call that, this C right here, we're calling B sharp in order to keep everything in alphabetical order. So C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, and C sharp. Now, if you're a rock guitar player, you can probably stop right there. I mean, for the most part, the keys of C, G, D, A, and E, and their relative minors, which we'll get to in another video, are the most common. And if you learned those, you'd be doing yourself a huge favor. I would definitely recommend that you stick with it through the whole thing, though, because once you learn where all of the notes are on the neck, it really does make a world of difference to your playing. It makes soloing easier. It makes writing, if you're into that, it makes that a lot easier. It makes being able to figure out how to play a song a lot easier. So definitely something I would recommend you stick with for a little while. Now, I'm going to give you a couple bonus things. Now, once you've got these scales sort of, once you got them memorized, I mean, and just pick one. You know, I mean, at the moment, it doesn't really make any difference. I'm going to pick C. But if you're working on a scale, you're working on a song in the key of C major, then you can take this and start working just along that one string. Now, if you don't have much of a knack for improvising, you can take simple nursery rhymes or something like that and learn how to play that song on one string. And then maybe improvise around that. And whatever, and you can kind of move around it a little bit. Obviously trying to take the time to name the notes either as you go or at least your ending notes, right? So you could play something like, and then name that note. That's an F. That's C. There's another C. B. There's A, and so on and so forth. So you start to get familiar with it. Use the song you're learning as a play-along track or whatever. Now the cool thing is, too, it's like if you're using, let's say you're using a pentatonic, maybe A minor pentatonic and C major. Those are related scales. Again, we'll talk about some of that later. You could be riffing on your 5th fret A minor pentatonic. And then walk up the C major scale or down the major scale, and then into the pentatonic. You can move your way all the way around. And that opens up a lot of doors for your improvising. So anyway, I hope you'll stick. Like I said, this is it's part of a series, so I hope you'll stick with it. We're going to talk about the flat keys, the flat major scales next. Then we're going to start shifting this from a linear trajectory along the neck to a lateral one going across the neck. We're even going to work on some stuff diagonally, so that by the time you're done with this, you'll have all sorts of different ways to play the same scale so that you can get in and out of it quickly. And on top of it, you will learn so much more about the names of the notes on the guitar neck. It'll make the whole thing, it'll demystify the whole guitar. So what I would recommend is take this video, take it a step at a time. I know I was talking fast through the whole thing, but take your time, go through one scale at a time. And remember that every time you move up to the next position, like I described here, you're going to carry the names of the notes from the previous scale to the next scale. And then you're just going to raise that second to last note to help keep the major scale formula. So if you've got any questions, hit me up in the comments. And if you enjoyed the content, if you're finding this useful, by all means subscribe, turn on the notifications and all that good stuff so you can see when I post new lessons. Not only do I cover guitar, but I occasionally do songwriting lessons and music production. So if that's interesting at all to you, you definitely want to subscribe. In the meantime, I am Kevin O'Shaughnessy. Good luck with this, and I will see you in the next video.